Welcome to Autism Knows No Borders, a podcast where people connected to autism inspire change and build community. Together with the Global Autism Project, I'm your host, Rachel Harmon, a professional with over a decade of experience in the field of autism services, outreach, and advocacy. Are you a late diagnosed autistic person, or do you know someone who is? If this resonates with you, you'll want to listen to today's conversation, where we touch on how acceptance of one's autism can change over time. The following Global Autism Community Roundtable was facilitated by community moderator Hattie Angelise Fox, and it features autistic self-advocates Brian Middleton, Corbin Havener, Mary Johnston, Bob Schmoose, Amira Coyantes, and Adrian Sanchez, as well as community moderator Danielle Terrell. Among other things, we discuss finding out about an autism diagnosis at different stages in life, how autism presents differently in males and females, whether language matters when identifying as autistic, common challenges that autistics experience in childhood, like socialization, anxiety, and depression, and how to deal with them, whether masking is ever good, disclosing your autism with friends and family, and the Pathology Paradigm. In this episode, discover what's possible when you embrace your true identity. And now I present you the Global Autism Community.
Hi, my name is Robert or Bob Schmoose. I am an autism self-advocate as well as a mental health professional. I've been part of the Global Autism Project for a number of years now, and I believe in its mission. My focus on advocacy is for adult autistics and neurodivergents on becoming independent and also focusing on mental health as well as strengths-based and as well as utilizing creativity. I hope one day to do skill core.
Too. My name is Corbin Havener. I am a self-advocate. Currently in my new role as a contract teacher. I am lower elementary Montessori in a public school environment, working with lower elementary grades 1, 2, and 3. I am a 2023 Kenya Skill Corps alumni, and I'm working out of Bliss, Indiana right now.
Thank you, Corbin, and I love a Montessori pedagogy, so I'm right there with you. Hi, everybody. My name is Danielle Terrell. I have a master's in developmental disabilities, and I've been in the field of human services for the past 7 years and involved with the Global Autism Project for the past 4 years now. A Skill Corps alum, and I also do some behind-the-scenes work with our social media. So really excited to be here with everyone today.
My name is Adrian. I'm from North Carolina. I'm an IT specialist, and I've been on the autism spectrum for my whole life. And right now I'm in adulthood, on my way to self-discovery, and I'm on my way to being able to emphasize more on autism. And during my spare time, I study human behaviors, study some common norms on what everyone else is emphasizing, and helping to see how autism affects everyone and helping to shed it in a positive light. And so far, I've been part of the autism community for like half a year, and so far I'm learning a lot as I go through it, and it's really helping me to improve, and glad to share with the community.
My name is Mary, and I run a Instagram blog called Autistic Rainbow 15, and I try to post about helpful tips to help other autistic people and their friends or family.
Hello, I'm Amira. I'm from Lima, Peru. I am an autism self-advocate.
This month's topic was late diagnosis, and I really want to start by thanking the community for participating to the degree you guys all did. It was really fun to have some of these conversations, and let's revisit some aspects of them. And with that, I'm going to say the first subtopic that we addressed in group was really understanding how later diagnosis or later self-identification, and I do see the two as separate, may occur. So is there anybody who would like to share about what they see, experience, or have experienced around later or adult identification and diagnosis?
I'll go first if that's okay.
Absolutely, Mary.
So I was diagnosed at 12, actually. So I'm someone who's late diagnosed. And one thing that I notice a lot is already with women, people don't really believe that women are autistic or can be autistic. Like a lot of what people say is like, oh, you're anxious, you're overdramatic, or like it's all in your head. Or a lot of people will say like, oh, that's not autism, like that's anxiety or like mental illness, like depression or something. So they typically try to invalidate it, is what it feels like.
I definitely understand that a lot. And I probably should have introduced myself because as a late diagnosed individual myself and someone who's assigned female at birth, I definitely personally identify with those things that you shared, Mary, that the anxiety or it's just really that we're viewing it from the wrong perspective kind of a thing is often shared about our experience. So thank you for that. Is there anyone else who would like to talk about later diagnosis or how they found out they were autistic, even if you were diagnosed in childhood? Yes, Bob.
How I got my diagnosis is that I was 15, and what happened was it was actually during a moment of crisis where I was hospitalized. That's when it went to that point where I had to be hospitalized, 15 years old. And from the psychologist at the hospital, at the psychiatric unit, they told me about autism and they diagnosed me as that. I didn't know I had heard of it from time to time, but I didn't know exactly what it was until they told me. What they said, it was Asperger's, but now it's autism. So learning more about autism, it's just about what it is, the characteristics. It really helped me get a good perspective on what it is. I was told by my mother that it was suggested when I was 10 years old, but it wasn't fully diagnosed. But anywho, when I was diagnosed, when I learned the characteristics and symptoms of it, I was like, my God, it all makes sense. Because, I've always had social anxiety. I've always had focused interest. I stimmed. So, but I didn't know the words for that. I didn't know before my diagnosis. I didn't know what that was. So hearing that, like, that really made me understand more about myself.
It's a lot of really valid points. And I'm sorry that it came to a hospitalization. That's a scary thing to happen at any stage in your life, especially in your teen years. But I'm glad you learned more about yourself. Did that help you to kind of engage in more self-acceptance?
Yes. In fact, yes, very much so. I was able to it was an understanding of myself. And from then on, I learned more about myself and gained more knowledge on myself with this information. And not only that, but I was not alone.
Yeah, that's an important one. Anyone else want to share about identification, regardless of the stage in life and what it did or didn't do for them, especially those who have a later identification? And
I will say, as somebody who was, diagnosed around the traditional age, I eventually, I got accustomed to school very well. There was a bit of a mass to the point where I did get along with people. People got along with me, and I got a pretty good school experience. I was involved with a lot of stuff as well. I kept myself busy, and that was through college. And I felt like, well, I'm doing things all right. I'm doing well. And then that time happened when I graduated from college. And that is when there were things that were happening. I didn't quite know how to navigate them well in crisis. That included 2018, a very predatory, like getting into a very predatory employment role, just being tossed around, having including a meltdown and sort of pairing that with a series of family losses as well. There was just a lot that was not going well. And then I realized there were just some things in my life that, as well as I've done it as a student, there is just stuff that, you feel like as an autistic person that you feel like everybody has figured out but make no sense to you. And that's the big part of the existence right here. You feel like everybody has certain things figured out, but these things make no sense to you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. That's a lot of personal things to share. And please remember, you're not alone. Amira, would you like to share anything about when you became diagnosed or the process
Yeah,
for
sure.
you or your experiences?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed last year, found out when I was 20, and
Mhm.
I just would like to say that as a female, it took a very good psychiatrist to spot the autism. And they didn't not even call it autism at the first time. They said Asperger's, which is a term that is not used anymore for various reasons. But I think that if I had known that as a child, it would have helped me a lot to understand myself and other people that lived around me, because the therapists that I've seen along my life had said that I was an anxious child and that I felt the emotions very intensely, but none of them, not school counselors, not therapists, not other psychiatrists, had said that I had autism. And well, when this psychiatrist first told it to my parents, and then my parents told me after some time, I was like, well, this is key information that I should have known as soon as possible, because it's important to understand yourself. And it was a process of acceptance that I think helped me a lot with my personal growth. I also think that reading this book called Asperger's by Rudy Simon also helped me a lot to understand myself. But things that I just thought were personal things just were in reality autistic things, and that other people experience it as well. So knowing that I was not the only one that experienced the world that way was extremely important to me.
That makes so much sense. Adrian, is there anything you want to share? And I think it's really interesting to hear the contrast between some of the people who were diagnosed early in life and later in life. I love that everyone, first of all, has talked on a bunch of things, the lost kind of generation, the belief of females about the way they're experiencing the world. And that was kind of our second topic. And we've already sort of brought that in. So I'm going to invite Brian to kind of catch himself up, introduce himself, if there's anything he wants to share about later diagnosis or that differentiation between presenting in assigned male at birth people versus assigned female at birth people, or even speculations as to why. And you don't have to do all that, Brian. You're welcome to kind of do whatever you want, including talking about a later diagnosed friend of yours. That conversation is welcome in this space.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian. Some know me as the bearded behaviorist, autistic behavior analyst, a human who loves exploring. So I was late diagnosed. It was about the age of 26, 27, maybe 25. I forget exactly the year. I have not had the burning desire to go in and get the exact date of diagnosis. However, when I was a tween, I was diagnosed with nonverbal learning disorder, which apparently is one of the more common misdiagnoses for autistic assigned male at birth. I was privileged and in some ways not so privileged to be homeschooled. So I was not exposed to environments that were as averse as other people. And I attribute part of my success and my ability to do certain things that others might struggle with that. And I also attribute part of the masking and the unique way I've masked to be a factor in that too. I realized I might be autistic when I became a special ed teacher and was working with autistic children and going, God, this is my childhood. And so I pursued diagnosis. And because of the resources I had access to, my diagnostic journey was significantly easier compared to what many other people have reported. And I was very privileged in being able to access those resources. But since I realized I was autistic and got that official diagnosis, I explored into the neurodiversity community. My first thoughts that came to me when I got my diagnosis was, now I know what's wrong with me. And now I know what's wrong with that thought, because it's not something that's wrong with me. It's something that I experience, that we experience as autistics. It's not right or wrong. And I think that plays beautifully into that friend that Hattie was hinting at. Hattie Angelis is that friend. We we met we met at a conference and connected beautifully and started connecting via chat and conversations. And Hattie Angelis was hanging out with my crowd. And so I just assumed that she was autistic. So I asked one day that question, when did you realize you were autistic? And there's an unspoken rule in the autism community, and it sometimes is spoken, of we don't out people if they don't know. And I accidentally outed it at the Angeles.
So, in all
And
honesty, though, it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me.
it's always good when that positive happens.
It is. It is. So I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. And before we got started with this meeting, I asked really quick if
Sorry,
can
I
anything I've highlighted.
Angeli,
And it seems like the highlights
can you hear
fit
me?
really well in the next section of what we talked about in community. We're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about some of those challenges that autistics experience early in their lives. Whether we know or we don't know that our neurotype is different than the majority of people who we're sharing space with, it impacts our interactions. And so a couple of the things that we might want to touch on is the stigma that people experience around sharing the word that, the label, the human trait, I'm autistic, and or why certain wording matters. And people also might want to share about childhood challenges, masking experiences, and whether they feel it's ever good or always bad, or anxieties. So kind of just what are those challenges of being an autistic human? And do you think there's a difference when you are identified in earlier life versus later life? So is there anyone who'd like to tackle that first? Any part of it too?
Can I start?
I would love it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. First things first. Socializing. Oh my. As I said before, I was late diagnosed this and I just found out last year. But when I was a kid, socializing was a little bit easier for me than it is nowadays, to be honest. But it had always been like a challenging thing to do. And that because normally I was one of these kids that on the playground already like to play with pre-established rules for the game or the activities. And well, I was one of those kids that very stick to the rule. And even my teachers were like, okay, Amira, you're obeying the rules way too much. Chill a little bit. And I was like, I cannot. If I break a rule, I will cry. And that kind of scared the other kids out, or they think that it was odd. So yeah, it was kind of difficult to make friends, but the correct people came in and, well, the majority of them ended up being neurodivergent as well. So I think there's also a radar to identify other neurodivergent people in the area and that we always connect whether we know about it or not.
My best friend tends to say we run in packs at times, and all of our ability to regulate each other compliments, and that's part of survival sometimes. Thank you so much, Mira. I appreciate you sharing that. Is there anyone else you'd like to share?
I'll say, going off of what Amira said, it is really hard making friends as a kid, because a lot of the kids, even if you present more neurotypical, you can talk and do a lot of things independently, a lot of people see differences with how you speak and things you react to, and it kind of singles you out, and it always made me feel like I never really fit in anywhere. when I was growing up in public school, and it was hard to really kind of find a group that I was welcome in. And it really led to a lot of feelings of like anxiety and depression, especially feeling like scared to go to school because I never felt welcome there.
Those resonate with me deeply. And I wonder the degree all of us have a functional vocal verbal repertoire. I wonder what non-vocal autistics experience is comparatively, whether, they're diagnosed later or earlier in life. But that is a topic for another day. Robert, would you like to share with us?
Yes. So I think being diagnosed later in life, it was I would say, don't really know exactly how it would have played out if I was diagnosed when I was younger, because I was born 1989. So I grew up in the 90s when autism wasn't really well known in this part of the world, because the DSM didn't even have like it within its book until 1994. So it'd be so different to see how it would be. I think today, new autistic children, neurodivergent children have there's more resources for them depending on part of the world, but there's more resources for them than there are for adults. One thing I've noticed. And I think honestly, it came at a good time that I was diagnosed, because I was in middle of high school. I was at like the point where I didn't know how to handle situations, and finding that and identifying that was just a godsend for me. I hope that answers the question.
It definitely did. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Hello, Rachel here. Would you like to share your own perspectives by participating in roundtables like the one you're listening to? Join our online global autism community, a safe and judgment-free space where all kinds of people connected to autism regularly discuss important topics. For example, this month we talked about isolation versus building community and how to find a balance between the two. And as the new month approaches, we vote on which theme to discuss next. We'd love to see you over at community.globalautismproject.org. And now, back to the roundtable.
Corbin, you had really wanted to bring up stigma and the impact of it. I'd love to hear what you wanted to share.
When it comes to stigma, I think there are ideas that people like think about, when they think of autism, and it's like small, like little kid meltdowns, or things like nonverbal, or just looking and acting really differently. And while we should definitely be defending every member of our communities, I think the rise of late diagnosed, for example, helped give a statement that, hey, we've been here, we've been existing, we've had struggles, we've been going through it. Oftentimes, maybe if we've verbalized struggles, maybe it's like people don't get it, or you should try harder, or something like that. But then the other stigma that I thought it helps bring out is the fact that it was ever in anybody's minds that the value of eradicating the viruses that the MMR vaccine protects against would have ever been worth it, even though it is clear that there's a scientific connection, that there is no connection with vaccines and autism. The connotation itself was harmful. And I think the more of us that have been able to say, hey, we've been here, we interact with you every day. We can use a little bit more support, but we interact with us every day, and our lives and our experiences are valuable. So I think, the more of us that can be proud of who we are and speak of our experiences, the more we can quash the vaccine-related conspiracy theories, because to me, those remain one of the most harmful things that the stigma holds up.
That absolutely makes sense. I recently said to my boss the other day, vaccines don't cause autism, but autistics may create vaccines. Brian, you had your hand up. What's going on, bud?
So that is a beautiful segue into something that I learned from another autistic. one of our, elders, I guess you could say, in the autism community, Dr. Nick Walker, and I highly recommend her work, where she talks about the pathology paradigm. And the pathology paradigm, quite simply, is a paradigm or a worldview where autism is perceived as being something that needs to be cured. And we've seen this pathology paradigm crop up over and over and over again in other areas having to do with disability rights and civil rights, especially civil rights. For example, for a long time, Black folks were told that if they were trying to escape from slavery, they were suffering a mental illness. Women were diagnosed with hysteria for wanting to be treated with respect and dignity. People in the queer community were diagnosed with a whole slew of, quote, disorders and problems for being different. And the pathology paradigm is quite simply the use of the existing social norms and structures to try to control and coerce people into behaving a certain way. And autistics, we are neurodivergent in that we diverge from the accepted neurotype. Neurodivergence means diverging from socially accepted neurotypes. It does not mean diverging from typical development, because it has absolutely nothing to do with typical development, because the entire developmental curve is typical for humans. There are some people who develop faster. There are some people who develop slower. It's not a race. It's where are you, the individual, at? And the pathologizing of autistics has become so prevalent that instead of looking at issues like, for example, inflammation, there's some studies that have been published that show that autistics have higher rates of inflammation by comparison to comparison samples. And instead of being like, wait, is that a symptom of being autistic, or is that a symptom of the environment that autistics live in? It's just an assumption that, well, that's what causes autism. But is it the cause of autism, or is it a characteristic of living in a highly stressful environment? There is significant research to demonstrate that when somebody is in a highly stressful, non-receptive, antagonistic environment, that they experience a lot of inflammation. How about anxiety and depression? Is that a characteristic of autism, or is that a characteristic of social isolation? And this idea of a person with autism, I like to use this as a comparison. I know some people are like, well, we can all get along because we can all use identity for first language, and it doesn't matter which we use. And I disagree. If somebody chooses to use person first language, I'm not going to jump on their case when I'm having a conversation with them. I'm going to look for an opportunity to help them see what person first language is implying when the time is right. And so that's, I think, the biggest confusion that people have. Some people are like, well, why can't we get along? I'm like, we can. And I can also help people see that when I say person with autism, it's similar to saying person with cancer. It's similar to saying person with diabetes. It's saying similar to person with heart disease. That's like saying that because I have a child, I am a person with parentalism. Because I like writing poetry, I'm a person with poeticism. Because I like going hiking, I'm a person with athleticism. It's very odd, because autism is a part of who I am. It's not something separate from me. And this myth of separation is so thoroughly enculturated that the underlying assumption is it's something to be fixed. It's something wrong with the person, instead of asking the question, what is disability? And what disability is an interaction between the individual and their environment. There are factors that can contribute to disability when it comes to, like, if you have an impediment of some sort, that can definitely get in the way. But when we can see that, no, there's nothing wrong with you, there's something wrong with the challenges that the environment faces, it allows us to be able to overcome a lot of challenges. And it allows us to address one of the biggest issues I see in the autism community, which is, well, it's okay because I'm autistic, when they make a social mistake. And it's like, well, no, there's still accountability. Like, just because I'm autistic doesn't mean I'm not accountable for my behavior. It just means that
That
we
makes
can
sense.
understand what's happening.
Absolutely, Brian. I appreciate those perspectives. So then, Robert, is there anything you really want to share either on the current question or so what do you do now? You're an adult, you're a teen, you're later in life, and you're learning that this word that you may have never heard of applies to aspects of your humanity, which would be the next kind of thing I'd like to share with everyone. So I kind of invite you to talk on either or both of those since you do need to go.
I think, it is a part of me, it is a part of my reality. And when you know something that's part of your reality, when you've come across something you haven't heard, but there's a name for it, there's an idea, there's a definition for it, and knowing that there's no single face of it. Like, that's something that's important. It's not much of a label, but more of a reality. Not a label, but a reality. And that's what I think it really represents for me. It's a reality of who I am. Another autistic person might be different, but that's their reality.
There's a few people who haven't gotten a chance to speak. And so I want to make sure that we allow them those times. And guys, feel free to pick from either space. Like, do you want to speak about the challenges around, childhood anxieties and stigmas that you faced? Or do you want to speak about kind of, okay, so now I have this word and this word represents an aspect of who I am and how I am and how I interact with the world around me. And so what do I do? How do I then help myself shift my thinking?
I'd say for me, when I started my blog back in 2020, it really helped me discover like what autism means to me and to not be ashamed of being autistic, and that it's okay to be proud of who you are and embrace who you are and not have to worry about conforming to what society expects you to be. And you can just be who you are, like, without being ashamed of it.
That makes total sense. And thank you for sharing that. Phil, Corbin, anyone want to share something? There you go. Hey, Adrian. Yeah, please.
Yes, I would say that it's very important to have a good realization on your autism and not keep it a secret and just ignore it the whole time, because once you do that, then there's just no way that you know what you're capable of, and you don't know about the accommodations that you really need. And so that's why it takes more than just a diagnosis to just have the autism. It also takes good realization in order to know how it works. As for me, I was able to cure all of my social anxiety, if not completely all of it, and I think it's beneficial to be aware once you have the diagnosis, because realization of the meeting is just as important. And if I had that realization back in my earlier years, then I would have known that it's just not worth it to try to be like everyone else, not worth it to try to mirror everyone's behavior completely. It's important to embrace your difference and be able to show society what you can be capable of. And most importantly, not look at it as a disorder, and more important, to see it as a embraced dynamic. And we're all different here, and everyone else needs to realize that as well, especially if you have hobbies that help you to do stuff in a positive light, as well as balancing a good work life in order to have a good outlook.
Love that. That was so beautifully put. And you shared when we were chatting the other day, the importance of not just self-identification, but then identifying what it means inside of yourself to be an autistic person. And I think you articulated that really well, because once we know ourselves better, we know what we need better. So thank you. Mira, is there anything you wanted to add? Corbin?
Yeah, I think, Adrian, identifying hobbies and stuff is a great thing. Aside from following like sports teams and everything, I love navigation. So, it allows me that freedom to like go to New York City solo, because exploring and navigating the subway system is an adventure on its own. And I can embrace my enthusiasm for navigating. And it's an enthusiasm that not a lot of people, like not as many people as I wish would share, but it's really fun for me. And, we all deserve our idea of fun. So.
That's pretty good. Sounds like you won't get lost easily with navigation.
Right, Adrian? I live in New York, and I now want Corbin to come visit New York so he can take me through the subway system. Does anyone else want to share anything? All right, I'm going to give Brian a jumping off point then. And that was for me, I've used a lot of ACT to help myself move forward. Acceptance that I am where I am and I am who I am. And the more that I accepted me, the more I could then choose, well, what works best for me. Adrian's mentioned things like finding the ways that work well for you or the accommodations you need. Corbin mentioning embracing the things that make you happy. Mary mentioning letting go of some of those anxieties because you understand that your mind just works differently than the neuromajority or the people you're socializing around. And so for me, some of those practices have been super helpful. While I still struggle with disclosing with certain family and friends because the word holds a stigma and they've just decided in their head what it means to be autistic. And I don't always have the energy to fight through that. So anyone else want to jump on that in our last 5 minutes before we wrap up?
I just would like to say a thing.
Absolutely.
Okay. So when I found out I was autistic and when I decided to tell my grandparents, they didn't really understood what I meant.
Do you feel like your grandparents understand you now?
Well, I don't think so, but I think it's better that way, kind of. The term was new to them, like 100% new. And they just interpret it as I'm a very anxious person. But they weren't able to comprehend the complexity of what I was telling them. But at least they got the key message that I need my time to do things. So that's fine. And I think there's also like a thing that they didn't understand because I'm not the only grandchild that has neurodivergency in the family. So like they're kind of used to it because of my cousin. And so they were like, oh, so our grandchildren just need time to do things and their space with social events. So I think that as long as they get the key message, it's fine.
Definitely makes sense.
I want to quickly play off a little bit off of what Robert said before he left, because I feel like he hit the nail very thoroughly on the head. And I want to start with a quote that pretty much everybody who has interacted with autism in some form has heard in some variation. The exact quote is Dr. Stephen Shore. I looked it up, so I knew who said it. And the quote is, when you meet one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And that is indicative of the pathology paradigm, because that is a very odd way of saying everybody is different. Everybody is unique. Everybody has their own experiences. Like, do we have common themes and trends that pop up for different people? Of course. That's the reason why we have tropes and we have all sorts of fun little inside jokes, and unfortunately why we have stereotypes, and also why we have shared stories and all sorts of other things that bind us together. And I'm not going to be the person who says we need to focus on what we have in common, because that's ignoring all the data that shows that we have differences too. I'm going to say, why can't we celebrate our commonalities and differences? Why can't we see that we all struggle and we all thrive? Why is it that we have to break a certain group of people down into a list of deficits and milestones, whereas other people are not broken down into deficits and milestones? Why can't it be that we focus in on each of our unique differences and our commonalities and find common ground? Social skills and how they're taught are basically neurotypical social skills or social scripts being forced on autistics and other neurodivergents. Why is it that social skills are taught to autistics and not taught to everyone? Why is it that we're expected to enculturate ourselves into the culture that we're a part of instead of learning to accept and interact with each other? The reality is we're going to have conflict. The reality is we're going to have differences. There's never going to be true peace until there's no more life, which is never going to happen because conflict is a part of existence. But can we have harmony? Can we connect with each other? Can we understand differences? Can we accept that there's going to be differences that we're never going to be able to resolve, and accept that there's differences that we're going to be able to easily resolve, and a continuum in between? Social skills is not social scripts. Social scripts fall under social skills. But what really is social skills is understanding that my experiences are different from your experiences, and that we're not always going to agree, but we are going to agree that we can interact with each other in a way that is kind and understanding while holding our boundaries and respecting each other's boundaries. And social skills should include, like teaching social skills should include teaching how to hold and maintain boundaries and also choose to disengage from the other person. And understanding and accepting that we have differences and commonalities is one of those things. We don't see behavior scientists and psychologists and psychiatrists and teachers showing up at a Super Bowl party and saying, hey, this is a hyper-focused special interest that you guys have. You shouldn't be doing this. We don't see people showing up at office fantasy football parties and going, what's wrong with you people? This isn't reality. Get a reality check. And yet, when we have a bunch of autistic nerds sitting around a D&D table playing, we get other people chastising, criticizing, that sort of thing. When we see a adult enjoying a perfectly harmless pastime of a show, My Little Pony, I'm not a brony, but I fully support somebody else's right to be able to enjoy a TV show and not pathologize them and say there's something wrong with them because they enjoy a lighthearted, cute show that teaches that friendship is magic. And that's, it keeps on coming back to the pathology paradigm and learning that we need to accept ourselves, because the opposite of pathology paradigm is the neurodiversity paradigm. The opposite of pathology paradigm is the functional contextualist paradigm. It's the idea that our behaviors function and they work for us in our context. And there may be more efficient ways of behaving and doing things, and there may be less efficient ways of behaving and doing. But my job as a behavior analyst and as an autistic and as an advocate for disability rights is not to show up and tell people how to live their lives, but to ask, how can I help them live their life in an efficient way that does not create struggle, but instead creates thriving? And they define thriving, not me.
Brian, thank you so much, because that's 100% on point. I am very much one of those, like, let's look at our similarities, but I often say to people I care about, it is our similarities that will bring us together, but it's our differences that make us stronger. And the only way that I can know where I differ from somebody is taking the time to get to know them in the ways that they want to be known. And so, I really appreciate that message, that the individual in front of you is who defines thriving. And I appreciate all of you, community, for being here, for showing up, for being a part of this time and this space, for sharing really personal things. The people I found community with me, and they heard my voice as one of their own. But for other people, that pathway looks like their children. And for other people, that pathway looks like struggling and being in a lot of pain before somebody actually sees why, and then helping them to move out. I really, really appreciate you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to help facilitate this roundtable. I appreciate the participation that I've been getting in community. I'm super thankful to everyone who chose to share this time, this space with us.
Thank you, Angelise. And thank you for stepping up and taking the lead on this conversation. When we were discussing the subtopics for this month, it just felt so natural for you to lead this conversation, given all of your experience directly as a late diagnosed woman. You did a beautiful job, and everyone else, we'll see you in the community. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, community. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to Autism Knows No Borders. Are you a self-advocate willing to share your story and educate others? Or a professional seeking to hear directly from autistic voices and improve your practice? Or maybe you're a family member hoping to support and empower your loved one. Whatever your connection to autism is, we'd love to hear your takeaways from this episode in our online global autism community, where hundreds of people from all over the world come together to support each other and know that they're not alone. Join us today at community.globalautismproject.org. Let's work together to transform how the world relates to autism. Thanks for listening. Take care.